I am Briar James, 30 years old, from Washington, and I will never forget the sound of my parents laughing when I told them I wanted to be an artist. It wasn't cruel laughter, not the kind you'd hear in a movie. It was worse, quiet, knowing, the kind that says, "You poor thing, you really believe that's possible?" I remember the scene as vividly as a painting. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast. Rain pressed softly against the windows, the gray light of a typical Seattle morning spilling across the table. I stood there, clutching my portfolio, sketches, charcoal pieces, concept designs, the first real work I'd ever been proud of. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Mom stirred her tea, eyes calm and dismissive. "I'm applying to the Academy of Arts," I said, heart thundering. "They've accepted my portfolio. Classes start in the fall." Dad lowered the paper just enough to see me. "You're joking." "I'm not." Mom smiled, a thin line that never reached her eyes. "Briar, honey, art isn't a career. It's a hobby. You'll grow out of it." I swallowed hard. "It's what I'm good at." Dad chuckled under his breath. "Good at?" "Sweetheart, being good doesn't pay the bills. Do you think the world needs another starving artist?" Their laughter hit me like rain turning to hail. Sudden, sharp, unrelenting. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I remember standing there, portfolio pressed to my chest, cheeks burning. I had imagined this moment so many times, the pride in their eyes, the support, the "we always knew you could do it." Instead, all I saw was disappointment disguised as concern. When I didn't respond, Mom sighed. "You're a smart girl. You could be a teacher or a nurse or something stable. Why throw it all away on drawings?" "They're not drawings," I whispered. Dad folded the newspaper, his tone soft but final. "You're 23, Briar. It's time to grow up. Grow up." That was the phrase they always used whenever I did something they didn't understand. When I dyed my hair blue, when I painted my bedroom walls with murals instead of buying wallpaper, when I refused to take a job at the insurance firm where Dad worked. Growing up, to them, meant giving up. I left the kitchen without another word, the echo of their laughter trailing behind me like a ghost I'd carry for years. That night, I sat in my tiny room upstairs, surrounded by my sketches. Rain dripped steadily against the window pane, and every drop felt like a heartbeat. I should have been used to disappointment. But that moment marked something different. It was the first time I realized that love doesn't always mean belief. I flipped through my portfolio, page after page of pencil and ink. Each stroke carried my pulse, my escape, my truth. But their voices lingered. "It's not practical. You'll never make a living. Be realistic." So, I packed it all away, literally. I placed the folder in a box, pushed it under my bed, and promised myself I'd stop dreaming. For the next year, I tried to be the daughter they wanted. I got a job at an office downtown. Gray cubicles, fluorescent lights, polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. I wore pencil skirts instead of paint-stained jeans. I nodded in meetings, memorized corporate jargon, and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. But at night, my hands ached for color. I'd come home, stare at blank walls, and feel something inside me suffocate a little more each day. The final straw came during one of those family dinners that pretended to be normal. Mom had invited a few of her friends from church, women who wore pearls and praised their children's promotions. "Briar works in finance now," Mom said proudly, as if she'd painted the lie herself. "Finance?" one of them asked. "That's wonderful. Such a stable field." I smiled politely, slicing my food in silence. "She used to be into art," Dad added with a chuckle. "We cured her of that phase," they laughed. Everyone laughed. And something inside me cracked. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick was perfect, my hair neat, my blouse tucked just right, and I had never felt more hollow. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the woman staring back at me and thought, who are you trying to be for them? That night I drove to the nearest art store. It was raining again. Washington rain, thin and endless. I bought a canvas, paints, brushes, everything I had once loved. When I got home, I cleared my kitchen table and started painting. For the first time in years, I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just painted. It was messy, imperfect, alive. And when I stepped back hours later, hands trembling, I realized what I'd painted wasn't just color. It was defiance. A few days later, I quit my job. Mom called, furious. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but at least it'll be mine." Dad didn't call at all. The next months were brutal. I worked part-time at a coffee shop to pay rent and painted in the evenings. I posted my work online, one piece at a time, half hoping, half doubting anyone would care. But slowly people started to notice. Comments trickled in. "This feels alive. You made me cry. Do you sell prints?" For the first time, my art wasn't just mine. It was speaking to someone. Still, every success felt haunted by their voices. At my first local art fair, I saw them again. Mom and Dad, strolling through the tents, pretending not to see me. Until they did, Mom's expression froze. Dad's jaw tightened. I stood tall, surrounded by my paintings, the same ones they'd once told me were worthless. "Briar," Mom said softly. "These are yours?" "Yes, they're good," I smiled faintly. "They've always been good." They didn't reply. They just looked around awkwardly, as if they'd stepped into a reality they couldn't quite accept. And that was the moment I realized I didn't need their approval anymore, because I had finally learned to live for myself. When I look back, I realized the laughter in that kitchen wasn't the first time my parents had clipped my wings. It was just the loudest. Their disapproval had always been there, quiet and constant, like a low hum in the background of my life. Growing up, our house in Tacoma was the kind of place where silence was considered discipline. Emotions were messy, creativity was wasteful, and dreams, those were distractions from real life. I remember being 8, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with crayons scattered everywhere. I'd drawn a mural of our family, Mom with her pearl earrings, Dad in his gray suit, and me with bright purple hair, smiling under a big yellow sun. When Mom saw it, she didn't smile. She frowned. "Purple hair? Really, Briar?" "It's fun," I said. She sighed. "People will think you're odd if you keep doing things like this. You should draw things that make sense." Dad didn't even look up from his briefcase. "You can't make a living drawing cartoons, sweetheart." They never shouted, never hit me, never called me names. But somehow their quiet disappointment hurt worse. Every word they said made me smaller, less certain of who I was allowed to be. By high school, I'd learned how to hide my art. While other girls hid diaries filled with love letters, I hid sketchbooks. I'd draw late at night, sitting on my windowsill under the soft hum of the streetlight outside. The world was quiet then, just me, my pencil, and the sound of graphite scratching paper. Sometimes I'd imagine what it would be like to show them one of my pieces, to see pride instead of judgment in their eyes. But every time I pictured it, I'd hear Dad's voice in my head. "Grow up, Briar." So I learned to keep my colors to myself. In college, I tried to compromise. I didn't apply to the art program I wanted. I chose business management, the safe choice, something they could brag about at dinner parties. At first, I thought I could handle it. I even convinced myself that maybe I'd learn something useful about running a gallery someday, but lectures about profit margins and quarterly reports drained me faster than any sleepless night ever had. My notebooks filled with doodles instead of notes. Professors would pause mid-sentence, noticing me sketching portraits instead of taking down formulas. I'd laugh it off. "It helps me focus," I'd say. Inside, I was falling apart. The day I told my parents I wanted to switch majors, they looked at me as if I'd confessed to a crime. "Art?" Dad said, his voice cold. "You're halfway through business school and now you want to throw it away for art?" "I'm not throwing it away," I argued. "I'm saving myself." Mom's lips thinned. "Don't be dramatic. Everyone wants to be special at your age." "I'm not trying to be special. I'm trying to be happy." Dad stood up then, his chair scraping against the tile. "You're ungrateful. Do you think we worked our whole lives so you could waste yours? That word, waste, clung to me like oil. That night, I cried for hours. Not because they said no, but because they truly believed they were right. I finished my degree out of guilt, walking across the graduation stage with a smile so fake it hurt my face. The applause felt hollow. I didn't feel proud. I felt trapped. Afterward, Dad clapped me on the back. "Now you can start your real life," he said. And I remember thinking, no, this isn't my life. It's yours. I tried to live their version of success. I got that corporate job in Seattle. I wore the same polished masks everyone else did. The office smelled like toner and coffee, 1,000 tiny ambitions dying in fluorescent light. My cubicle was gray, the walls, the carpet, even the people felt gray. Every day I'd watch the clock, waiting for 5 o'clock like it was a rescue mission. But the universe has a funny way of testing how long you'll live in a lie before breaking. It started small. A doodle on a sticky note, a sketch in the margins of a memo. My coworkers noticed. "You're actually pretty good," they'd say, smiling. "Why are you even here?" I didn't have an answer, so I stopped drawing in secret. During lunch breaks, I'd pull out my sketchbook and draw the world around me. The receptionist twirling her hair, the accountant sipping black coffee, the janitor sweeping with quiet rhythm. They were all so human, so real. Those sketches became my lifeline. They reminded me that even in the dullest places, beauty existed, if you had the courage to see it. But at home, the disapproval never ended. Every Sunday I visited my parents for dinner. It always started the same. Polite greetings, polite smiles, polite lies. Then came the subtle jabs. "So how's your little hobby?" Mom would ask, slicing her roast chicken with precision. "It's not a hobby," I'd reply. "I sell some commissions now." Dad would scoff. "Commissions? You mean people actually pay for those drawings?" "Yes, Dad, they do," he'd shake his head. "You're too smart to waste your time on fantasies. You could still go back to grad school, make something of yourself." That phrase again, make something of yourself, as if I was clay that hadn't yet hardened into something respectable. One night, I'd had enough. "Why do you keep acting like art isn't something?" I snapped. "It's not nothing, Dad. It's my work. My life." Mom sighed like I was being childish. "You're too emotional, Briar. That's your problem." I looked at her across the table, at the perfectly arranged plates, the spotless glasses, the air thick with expectations, and realized I'd been trying to earn approval that was never coming. That night, I made a promise to myself. If they wouldn't believe in my dream, I started painting more seriously. Every spare moment, before work, after dinner, late into the night, I filled canvases with color, emotion, and rebellion. When I was painting, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't the disappointment, the waste, the one who didn't fit. I was alive, and for the first time in my life, I started to believe that maybe my art wasn't useless. Maybe they were just blind, what I didn't. No then was that their shadow, that disapproval I had spent years trying to escape, was about to push me into the brightest part of my life. Because sometimes, when people refuse to see your light, you learn to shine so brightly, they have no choice but to notice. The breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came with a whisper. It was a Saturday evening in early spring, the kind that should have smelled like renewal. Cherry blossoms along the sidewalks, soft wind brushing through downtown Seattle. But that night, the air in my apartment felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by half-finished canvases. The soft hum of my space heater mixed with the faint sound of rain outside. My hands were covered in paint, streaks of cobalt blue and ochre climbing up my wrists. I was working on a portrait, one that had consumed me for weeks. It was abstract, emotional, the kind of painting that came from somewhere deep and raw. I'd just added the final layer of texture when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Dinner tomorrow. Don't forget. No question mark, no warmth. Just an order." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "I'll try to make it." Her reply came instantly. "You always try. We'd appreciate it if you actually cared enough to show up for once." That's when I felt it, the slow burn that had been growing for years. The same guilt they always knew how to twist. I wiped my hands on a rag, took a deep breath, and forced myself to focus on my painting again. But the words wouldn't leave me alone. You always try. You never care. They'd said it in 100 ways before, about my job, my relationships, my art. Every time I tried to build something that belonged to me, they acted like it was a personal insult to them. The next day I went anyway. Because old habits die hard. Their house looked the same as always. Perfect lawn, perfect porch, perfect silence. Mom opened the door before I could even knock. "You're late." "Hello to you too," I said, forcing a smile. She gave me the once-over, her eyes flicking from my paint-stained jeans to my chipped nail polish. "Honestly, Briar, you couldn't even dress up? It's Sunday dinner, not an art class." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Dad was in the living room, watching a political talk show at full volume. He didn't look up when I walked in. "You still doing that painting thing?" "That painting thing is my work," I said. He smirked. "Right, and how's that paying off?" "You rich yet?" Mom chuckled from the kitchen. "Be nice. She's sensitive about her little projects." Their laughter echoed through the house, the same house that used to smell like fresh cookies and warm memories, but now reeked of judgment and control. Dinner was awkward. Mom had made pot roast, my least favorite meal. She knew that, of course. I'd told her years ago that it made me nauseous. "So," she began, slicing into the meat, "how's the coffee shop? Still wasting your degree there?" "I quit months ago," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Oh?" Her tone shifted slightly, a dangerous blend of curiosity and mockery. "And what are you doing now?" "I'm working on commissions. Some galleries are interested in my pieces." Dad barked out a laugh. "Galleries? Come on, Briar. People say things like that all the time online. Doesn't mean anything." "It does to me." Mom looked at me like I'd said something ridiculous. "You need structure, stability, not these daydreams that lead nowhere." And that's when something in me finally snapped. I set my fork down and met her eyes. "You know what's funny? Every time I try to share a piece of myself with you, you find a way to make me feel small. I'm tired of pretending that your approval means anything." Her face went pale. "Excuse me?" Dad's voice hardened. "Watch your tone." "No," I said louder now. "You watch how you talk to me. I'm 30 years old, and you still talk to me like I'm some kid who needs your permission to breathe. I've built a life you know nothing about because you never cared to ask." Mom crossed her arms. "We've supported you." "No. You controlled me." I stood up, my voice shaking. "You told me what I could study, what kind of job I should have, how I should look, who I should be. You call it love, but it's not. It's fear. You're afraid of having a daughter who doesn't fit into your little picture-perfect world." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the television seemed to hush. Then Dad muttered, "Ungrateful." That word hit me like a slap. I took a step closer, eyes burning. "Ungrateful? I spent years trying to be what you wanted. I buried my dreams just to make you proud. And now that I'm finally doing something that makes me happy, you call me ungrateful?" He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. I left the house that night without saying goodbye. Rain poured as I ran to my car, soaking through my jacket, but I didn't care. I drove home with the windows fogging up, tears blurring the lights of the city. When I finally got back to my apartment, I collapsed on the floor, heart pounding. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for speaking the truth. I felt free. That night, I painted again. I didn't plan it. I didn't even change out of my wet clothes. I just grabbed a brush and started moving. Every emotion, every insult, every memory, every tear poured out of me in color. Reds for anger, blues for sadness, gold for the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still find peace. By dawn, my living room looked like a battlefield of color. My hands were trembling, my eyes swollen, but my heart felt alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't painting for approval. I wasn't painting to prove anything. I was painting because I had to. A few weeks later, I received an email from a small gallery in downtown Seattle. They'd seen my work online and wanted to feature me in a local showcase. I remember staring at the message, frozen. I reread it 5 times before whispering aloud, "They want me?" And that's when it hit me. The world that had once felt so small, so suffocating, was finally opening up. But even as I smiled, I couldn't help but think of my parents, sitting in that perfect house, surrounded by silence and judgment, never realizing they just pushed me into becoming exactly who I was meant to be. That night, I framed the painting I'd made after that stormy dinner, the one filled with raw color and emotion. I titled it Freedom because that's what it felt like, and I swore, as I hung it on my wall, that I would never let their voices drown out mine again. Silence became my new roommate. After that night, the calls stopped. No texts, no check-ins, no birthday messages. It was as if I had died, and they were politely pretending to mourn in private. At first, the quiet felt peaceful, like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating under their expectations. But slowly the stillness turned heavy. Evenings stretched into endless hours, filled only with the hum of my refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I thought freedom would feel lighter than this. The first few weeks after cutting them off were a blur of determination and exhaustion. I poured everything I had into preparing for the gallery showcase. It was my first real opportunity. My chance to prove, not to them, but to myself, that I could survive without their validation. But the closer the date came, the louder my doubts grew. What if no one showed up? What if they were right, and I wasn't good enough? I'd lie awake at night, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, hearing my mother's voice whisper through the darkness, "It's not a real career, Briar." And then my father's voice would echo, cruel and calm, "You'll thank us someday when you realize we were right." Money was tight. My savings were dwindling, and commissions came in slow. I skipped dinners, lived on instant noodles, and used leftover paint until the tubes were nearly dry. I didn't tell anyone how close I was to losing my apartment. Sometimes, I'd look at the phone and consider calling them, not to apologize, but to hear something, anything. But I never did, because I knew that if I reached out, it wouldn't be love waiting on the other end. It would be control, disguised as concern. So I stayed silent. The day of the showcase came faster than I expected. I wore a secondhand black dress I'd tailored myself. My palms were sweaty as I stood in the corner of the small gallery on Pine Street, surrounded by strangers studying my work. The walls glowed with color. My color. Pieces that had once lived only in my tiny apartment now hung in perfect light. I should have been proud, but all I felt was fear. People murmured, nodding, pointing. A woman in a red scarf leaned toward one of my paintings, the piece titled Freedom. "This one," she said softly to her friend. "It feels like someone breaking free from themselves." Her words hit me like a wave. She understood. That night I sold 2 paintings, small ones. The prices barely covered rent, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone saw me, not as a disappointment or a failure, but as an artist. For the first time in years, I walked home with my head held high. But success, even in small doses, doesn't erase loneliness. The next morning, I woke up to an empty apartment again. My phone sat silent on the nightstand, no messages, no calls. I scrolled through social media, seeing photos of friends with their families, birthday parties, dinners, smiling parents. And something inside me twisted. Was I really strong, or just abandoned? There were days I couldn't tell the difference. Winter came early that year. My heater broke, and the landlord took weeks to fix it. I painted in layers of sweaters and fingerless gloves, my breath visible in the cold air. My fingers cramped, but I kept going, because if I stopped, I knew I'd start thinking too much, and that was dangerous. Some nights, I'd catch my reflection in the dark window, hair messy, eyes sunken, paint smudges on my cheeks, and I'd whisper, "You chose this, Briar. You wanted freedom. So don't you dare give up now." It became my mantra. Still, there were cracks in my resolve. Once, I saw my parents by accident, at a grocery store downtown. They didn't see me. Mom was picking out flowers. Dad was checking prices on wine. They looked older, smaller somehow, but still perfectly composed. For a second, I almost approached them. My feet even started to move, But then I stopped, because I realized I didn't know what I'd say. Would I tell them about my art show? The tiny spark of success I'd finally found? Would I tell them I missed them? Or would I tell them that their silence hurt worse than any insult ever could? I walked out of the store before they ever turned around. And as I stepped into the cold, something inside me hardened. A month later, I received an email from a local magazine that had covered the gallery event. They wanted to feature me in a small artist spotlight. My heart leapt, and then immediately sank. Because I knew they'd see it too. Sure enough, when the article was published, it was everywhere online. The headline read, "Local Artist Turns Family Rejection into Raw Emotional Success." The interview was honest, painfully honest. I'd told the writer how my parents never believed in my dream, how that pain fueled my art. 2 days later, my phone finally rang. It was Mom. Her voice was clipped, brittle. "You embarrassed us." "Embarrassed you?" I repeated. "I told the truth. You made us sound like monsters." I swallowed hard. "You treated me like one for years." Silence. Then quietly, "You always have to be the victim, don't you?" That was it. That was the moment I realized they didn't just disapprove of my choices. They resented my existence outside of their control. I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. That night, I painted again. Not to escape, but to release. The canvas started as darkness, layers of black, deep blue, gray. But then I added streaks of gold, fiery orange, and white. The colors collided, chaotic but purposeful, like the clash between pain and rebirth. When I finished, I sat on the floor, staring at it under the dim light. My fingers were numb, my body exhausted, but my soul felt alive. I titled it Isolation, because that's what this chapter of my life was. A painful, necessary silence, a cocoon I had to live through before I could ever become who I was meant to be. Power doesn't arrive like lightning. It creeps in quietly, disguised as small victories. A painting that sells, a kind email from a stranger. The first time you wake up and don't feel afraid of tomorrow. For me, it began on a Tuesday morning. The sun had barely risen over the Seattle skyline. My apartment smelled of coffee and turpentine, a strange mix of comfort and chaos. I sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook open, working on a new commission from a client in Portland. It wasn't much, just a family portrait done in my abstract style, but it paid enough for groceries and bills. That alone felt like a miracle. I had started posting my progress videos online, short clips of paint gliding across canvas, the slow reveal of form and color. I didn't expect anyone to care, but people did. They commented, they shared, they asked questions, and slowly, my follower count grew. One morning, I woke up to find one of my videos had gone viral. Over 100,000 views. My inbox was overflowing with commission requests and messages from people saying my art had moved them to tears. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I sat there, staring at the numbers on the screen, and whispered to myself, "You did this, Briar. You, not them." A week later, I got an email from a small art collective downtown. They wanted to host a solo exhibition. My exhibition. I read the message 3 times before I dared to believe it. When I arrived at the meeting, my hands were trembling. The gallery director, a warm, middle-aged woman named Elise, greeted me with a smile. "I've been following your work for months," she said. "There's emotion in your colors. Pain, yes, but also resilience. People connect with that." Her words wrapped around me like sunlight. For once, someone saw my art not as rebellion, but as truth. We planned the show for summer, 6 months away. Plenty of time to create a new collection. Elise wanted it to tell a story, a journey from darkness to light. I knew exactly what that meant. It was my story. The following months became a blur of creation. I painted until my arms ached and my eyes stung from lack of sleep. Every brushstroke carried a memory, the laughter, the rejection, the nights I almost gave up. I poured everything I had onto the canvas, and somehow, the pain became beautiful. Some nights, when exhaustion pressed down on me, I'd sit by the window and look out at the city lights. I'd whisper into the night, "Are you proud of me now?" I didn't know who I was asking. My parents, the universe, maybe both. But something inside me whispered back, "You don't need their pride anymore. Money got better." My online shop started bringing in steady orders. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to check my account before buying groceries. I upgraded my paint supplies, bought new canvases, even replaced the flickering light in my studio. The world felt different, not softer, but clearer. Still, their voices lingered in the corners of my mind. Sometimes, I'd wonder if they'd seen my growing success online. Part of me hoped they had. Another part prayed they hadn't. Then one evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I froze. It was Dad. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, shoulders slouched, eyes tired. He held his hat in his hands, as if unsure whether to step inside or not. "Hi, kiddo," he said quietly. I didn't move. "What are you doing here?" he sighed. "Your mother told me not to come, but I've been seeing your work. People talk about you, your art's all over the internet." I said nothing. I just wanted to say, "I'm proud of you." The words hit me like a wave. Proud? Now? After all those years? He looked around the apartment, the easels, the paint-streaked floor, the framed articles on the wall. "You really made something of yourself," he said. I was wrong. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to fall into his arms and pretend the past didn't exist. But the truth was heavier than that. "You weren't just wrong," I said quietly. "You broke me. You made me think my dreams were worthless." He lowered his gaze. "I know. Do you?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because when I needed you most, you laughed at me." "You both did." He nodded slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. "We thought we were protecting you. We didn't want to see you struggle like we did." I swallowed hard. "You didn't protect me, Dad. You caged me." He stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor. Then he said softly, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something." After he left, I sat in silence, my heart heavy and conflicted. Part of me wanted to forgive him. The other part wanted to let that pain fuel me until I'd burned away every ounce of weakness left inside. That night, I painted again. But this time, not from sadness. From strength, I called the piece Inheritance. It was a portrait, abstract, vibrant, and raw. Two shadowed figures stood on opposite sides of the canvas, their colors bleeding toward the center until they met in a blinding white light. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a step toward it. The next morning, Elise called. "Briar, you won't believe this," she said. "The mayor's office wants to include your exhibition in the city's summer arts festival. It's going to bring hundreds of visitors." I felt dizzy. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You deserve it." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long moment, heart pounding. It wasn't luck. It wasn't mercy. It was me. Every tear, every sleepless night, every insult. It all led here. And in that moment, I realized what real power was. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even success. It was freedom, the ability to exist without apology. As I prepped for the show, I taped a note to my studio wall, a promise to myself written in thick black ink. You owe your past nothing, but you owe your future everything. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at that note. Every time I felt the old pain stirring, I reminded myself that I had already survived it. And now, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something they could never take credit for, because I had found my power. And it was painted in every color they told me to erase. The first time I realized revenge could be quiet, I was mixing colors. I remember standing in front of a half-finished canvas, the smell of acrylics thick in the air, the hum of my old record player filling the apartment with faint jazz. My hands were steady, my mind sharp. For the first time, I wasn't painting from pain. I was painting toward something. Elise's gallery show had become the talk of the city's upcoming arts festival. My name was on every poster, every blog, every small feature in local magazines. The title of my exhibition? Becoming Color. But behind that name hid a deeper purpose, one only I understood. Because this wasn't just an exhibition. It was a reckoning. For years, my parents had told me art was useless. They said I was wasting my life, that I'd never make it, that I should be ashamed for even trying. And now, the same people who dismissed me would see the world applauding the very thing they tried to destroy. I wanted them there, not out of forgiveness. Out of truth, I wanted them to look at my work, at the faces of people they'd never met but whose emotions mirrored mine, and feel it, the weight of what they'd crushed, and the beauty of what had survived. It started with a letter. I didn't call, and I didn't text. I wrote. My handwriting shook slightly as I began. Dear Mom and Dad, there's an exhibition at the Pine Street Gallery this summer. My name will be on the wall. My work, the same art you said would never amount to anything, will be there for hundreds of people to see. You don't have to come, but I thought you'd want to know that your daughter did something with her hobby after all. I didn't sign it with love. I signed it simply, Briar. When I dropped the letter into the mailbox, I felt my heart pounding. The sound of the metal flap closing was final, satisfying, terrifying. That was the moment the setup began. In the weeks leading up to the show, I transformed my studio into a battlefield of color. Paint tubes littered the floor, sketches pinned to every wall. I wanted each piece to tell a story. My story. One canvas was titled The Silence, muted grays and blues tangled in thick, suffocating strokes representing the years I spent trying to please them. Another, Inheritance, glowed with gold and red, a symbol of the fire I had reclaimed. But my favorite was the centerpiece, the largest painting I had ever made. It stood taller than me, spanning nearly the entire wall. At first glance, it looked abstract. Bold swirls of light and shadow, chaos and calm. But if you stared long enough, you could see it. Two faint figures fading into the background, and a woman standing in the center, her face turned toward the light. It was them. It was me. I named it The Last Apology. As the opening night approached, Elise handled the logistics while I handled my nerves. The invitations went out to critics, local artists, influencers, and two names that made my chest tighten, Richard and Eleanor James, my parents. I didn't know if they'd come. Part of me hoped they wouldn't. The other part needed them to. I imagined them walking through the gallery, surrounded by people whispering about their daughter's brilliance, their success story. I imagined them realizing that every insult, every dismissal, every cold word had been turned into color, immortalized. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not confrontation, but triumph. Because nothing hurts a cynic more than watching the person they doubted become undeniable. The night before the exhibition, I barely slept. My apartment was a mess of brushes, receipts, and empty coffee mugs. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, staring at The Last Apology. I thought about all the nights I cried alone, painting through the ache of their rejection. I thought about that kitchen table, the one where they laughed at my dream. And I thought about what I'd say if I saw them tomorrow. Would I thank them? Would I tell them I forgave them? No, I'd just smile, because forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. The next evening arrived like thunder disguised as calm. The gallery was lit softly, the walls glowing with the warm hue of spotlights. My paintings hung in perfect order, a journey from darkness to brilliance. Guests filled the space, murmuring, laughing, sipping champagne. Elise squeezed my hand. They love it, Briar. You did it. I nodded, but my eyes were on the door. Then I saw them. My parents stood in the entrance, hesitant, out of place. My mother in her pearl earrings, my father in a stiff gray suit. They looked smaller somehow, unsure, vulnerable. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I forced my shoulders back and walked toward them. Briar, Mom said softly. This is impressive. Her eyes darted around, scanning the crowd, the paintings, the plaques with my name. We had no idea it would be like this. Dad cleared his throat. You've made quite a name for yourself. There was pride in his voice, but it sounded foreign, awkward, like a language he didn't fully understand. I smiled faintly. I told you I'd make something of myself. Neither of them replied. I led them through the exhibit silently, watching as they stared at each piece. When we reached the last apology, they froze. Mom's hand flew to her chest. "Briar, is that—" "Yes," I said. "It's us." She stared at the canvas, at the faint figures fading into shadow. "You really think of us this way?" "I don't think," I said quietly. "I remember." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then Dad whispered, almost to himself, "It's beautiful." I turned to him, searching his face for sarcasm. But there was none, only something fragile, regret maybe. For the first time, I saw them not as authority figures or enemies, but as people. Flawed, scared, human, and that realization didn't weaken me. It empowered me, because I wasn't their disappointment anymore. I was their mirror, showing them everything they refused to see. As the evening wound down, people congratulated me, shook my hand, took photos beside my work. My parents stayed near the back, silent, uncomfortable, but they didn't leave. That was enough. When the lights dimmed and the guests trickled out, Mom approached me one last time. "Briar," she said softly, "I don't know how to undo the past, but I see you now. Truly," I nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." She hesitated. "Can we talk sometime?" I looked at her. At the woman who had once told me my art was useless, now standing beneath a spotlight that reflected off my paintings. "Maybe," I said. "When I'm ready." Later that night, after the gallery closed, I walked through the quiet halls alone. My footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor. I stopped in front of the last apology and smiled through tears. I had painted my pain into power, my doubt into defiance, and my revenge into peace. It wasn't about destroying them anymore. It was about reclaiming me. Success doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand still while the world finally hears what silence tried to bury. The morning after the exhibition, I woke up to a flood of messages. My phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists, local bloggers, art critics, all asking for interviews. The Pine Street Gallery had been packed, and my name had found its way into the city's arts column. The headline read, "From Rejection to Reverence, the artist who painted her pain into gold." I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside me, scrolling through the article. My hands trembled as I read their words. They called me fearless, authentic, the voice of resilience. And beneath all that praise, a single thought pulsed like a heartbeat. They saw me, not as a disappointment. Not as a dreamer, as an artist. By noon, Elise called. "Briar, I hope you're sitting down," she said, her voice practically vibrating. "The Seattle Tribune just confirmed they're running a feature on you this Sunday. And get this, one of your paintings sold to a collector in San Francisco. For $8,000. I nearly dropped my cup. $8,000? Yes, and that's just the beginning. You're about to be everywhere. I couldn't breathe. Tears burned the back of my eyes. $8,000. The girl who used to hide her sketchbooks under her bed had just sold a piece of her soul, and the world called it priceless. When I hung up, I laughed through the tears. I wasn't even sure if I was happy, relieved, or just overwhelmed. Probably all three. The following week was a blur of interviews, lights, and cameras. I sat in sleek studios under bright bulbs, while hosts asked me about turning pain into art, about forgiving the past. I didn't name my parents, but I didn't need to. The story was clear. The girl who was told her art was worthless now had her work hanging in galleries across the coast. My favorite interview was with a young reporter named Amy. She had kind eyes and a notebook full of scribbles. She asked softly, "What kept you going when no one believed in you?" I smiled. The silence, I said. "When the world stopped cheering, I learned to clap for myself." She paused, eyes glistening. "That's beautiful," I shrugged. "It's true." The next day I went to the grocery store, the same one where I'd once seen my parents and turned away. This time people recognized me. A woman by the flower stand gasped, "Oh my God, are you Briar James?" I froze. Yes? I saw you on the news, she said, grinning. Your art. It's incredible. You've inspired me to start painting again. Her sincerity caught me off guard. I smiled back, truly smiling this time. Thank you. That means more than you know. As I walked out, I realized that the world I used to hide from was now reaching toward me. That was the strike. Not revenge by force, but impact by truth. My art was no longer a whisper. It was an echo. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hello? I answered. Briar? The voice was familiar, hesitant. It's your mother. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Mom? Yes, she said softly. Your father and I saw your interview on television. People have been calling us. Congratulating us? Congratulating you? I repeated, almost laughing. Yes, she said, sounding almost defensive. They say we raised a brilliant artist. That we must be so proud. I let out a shaky breath. And are you? There was a pause. We are, she whispered. We just didn't know how to show it before. I stared at the wall, my heart pounding. The walls of my apartment were covered with color, life, everything they once told me was useless. And now they wanted to share the credit. Mom, I said quietly, you don't get to be proud of the parts of me you tried to erase. Her voice trembled. Briar, please. We didn't mean to— Yes, you did, I cut in. But that's okay. You did what you thought was right. And I did too, she sniffed. Your father wants to talk to you sometime. Maybe one day, I said. But not yet. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking, not from anger this time, but release. Because I'd finally stopped needing their permission to exist. A few weeks later, the Seattle Tribune published my full feature, 4 pages of glossy photos and interviews. One photo showed me standing beside the last apology, smiling softly, the painting glowing behind me. The caption read, "An artist's greatest masterpiece isn't what she paints, it's who she becomes." That line stayed with me, because for the first time, I believed it. The ripple effect from that article was unlike anything I expected. Invitations poured in, art fairs, panels, even a museum outreach about adding one of my pieces to their contemporary collection. But what shook me most was what came after. A message, sent to my inbox from one of my old college professors. Briar, I owe you an apology. I used to tell students that talent means nothing without realism. I was wrong. You're proof that passion, when it refuses to die, becomes power. I read that message over and over. It wasn't just validation. It was vindication. All the people who told me I'd never make it, teachers, coworkers, even family, had been wrong. And I hadn't needed to fight them to prove it. I just had to succeed anyway. By late summer, I had become a name people recognized. Not famous, but respected. And the irony was beautiful. My parents' friends, the same ones who once looked down on me, began bragging about knowing me. I'd see their social posts tagged with my art, captions like, "We're so proud of our talented local artist, Briar James." The hypocrisy didn't hurt anymore. It just made me smile, because I didn't need to correct them. The truth was already loud enough. That fall, my work was featured in an art magazine's Women of Vision issue. The editor asked me to submit a quote to accompany my photo. I thought for a long time before typing one sentence. They told me my art was useless. Now it pays my rent and their silence. It wasn't just a statement. It was closure wrapped in ink. On the night the magazine launched, I went to the beach, the one near my apartment where I used to walk when everything felt hopeless. I sat on the sand, listening to the ocean, the waves pulling back and forth like breath. For years, I had been chasing approval, chasing love that came with conditions. But now I had something better, peace. The world was finally listening to the story I'd been trying to tell all along, and I didn't need to say another word. The thing about truth is that it doesn't knock politely. It bursts in, dragging every secret into the light. By the time autumn arrived, my story had spread far beyond Seattle. My face was on magazine covers, blogs, art newsletters. The world had decided I was the voice of resilience, the woman who turned rejection into renaissance. I should have felt triumphant. And I did, until the calls started. The first came from Elise. "Briar," she said, voice low and urgent. "You might want to check your email. The national press just picked up your story." I opened my laptop and froze. There it was. My photo under a bold headline that read, "The artist who painted her parents' cruelty into masterpieces." The article was detailed. Too detailed. Quotes from past interviews woven together with speculation about who the parents were. They'd pieced everything together. My background, my old social posts, even the suburb I grew up in. I scrolled down and my stomach turned. Someone had commented with their names, my parents' names, and below that, a link to their Facebook profiles. It was all out there now. Within hours, the story exploded. Strangers debated my life online. Some praised my strength. Others accused me of airing family, drama for sympathy. But the loudest voices were the ones calling out my parents. Can't believe people like this exist. Imagine crushing your kids' dreams like that. They don't deserve her. Their social pages flooded with hate. Photos of their picture-perfect lives, vacations, anniversaries, charity galas were swarmed with comments. Is this the mom who mocked her daughter's art? Maybe hang one of her paintings in that cold house of yours. Part of me wanted to look away. Another part couldn't. The truth had finally caught up with them. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was trembling. "Briar, they're attacking us online. Your father can't go to work without people whispering. How could you let this happen?" "I didn't write the article, Mom." "But you gave those interviews. You told them everything." I told my story. "The truth. You've humiliated us." I laughed bitterly. "Humiliated you? You did that to me for years. Now the world finally sees what I lived through." She started to cry. Real tears, not the performative kind. "Please, Briar. They're saying awful things. Your father's devastated." For a moment, guilt flickered in me. Then I remembered that kitchen, that laughter, that silence. "I never wanted revenge," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to see me. But I guess the world had to show you first." I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, the story hit national television. A talk show aired a segment titled, "Tough Love or Emotional Abuse: The Artist Dividing America." Clips of my interviews played over soft music, followed by blurred photos of my hometown. Experts debated whether my parents' actions were normal parenting or toxic control. It was surreal, watching strangers dissect my childhood like it was a case study. But amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. People started sending me letters, not of hate, but of gratitude. A young woman wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to apply to art school." A father wrote, "I realized I've been discouraging my son the same way your parents did to you. I'm trying to change." And a teacher wrote, "Thank you for reminding us that creativity isn't childish. It's survival." I cried reading those messages, because finally, my pain had purpose. Meanwhile, my parents disappeared from social life. Their Facebook accounts went dark. Their neighbors stopped greeting them at church. The facade they'd built, perfect family, perfect morals, cracked under the weight of public scrutiny. I didn't enjoy their suffering. Not really. But I couldn't deny the dark satisfaction of seeing justice unfold without me lifting a finger. Revenge, it turned out, didn't need anger. It needed truth. Weeks passed. The noise began to settle. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. I found myself pacing the apartment one night, unable to sleep. The glow from the city lights spilled through the blinds, painting gold stripes across the floor. I thought about my parents. 2 proud people, stripped bare by their own actions. Had I gone too far? Then I remembered my father standing in that gallery, eyes filled with quiet regret, and my mother whispering, "We see you now." They had wanted credit for my success without accountability for their cruelty. The world had simply denied them the luxury. The following month, the museum in Portland announced a feature exhibit titled Freedom in Color, highlighting my work as part of a collection on female resilience. During the press conference, a reporter asked, "Breyer, what message do you want people to take from your story?" I took a breath. The cameras were on me, microphones close enough to catch every tremor in my voice. "I want people to understand that dreams aren't childish," I said. "They're sacred. And when someone tries to destroy yours, the most powerful thing you can do is succeed anyway." A pause. Flashes of cameras. Then I added softly, "Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means refusing to let it define you." The room fell quiet. After the conference, I stood outside in the crisp autumn air, looking at the posters with my name on them. The same name my parents once told me would never matter. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, and I realized this was the full circle. They had tried to silence me, and in doing so, they had given me the story that would make me unforgettable. That night, I got another call. This time, from my father. "Breyer," he began, voice rough. "We deserved what came. I won't pretend otherwise." I said nothing. I lost friends. We both did. But maybe that's fair. Maybe it's time we faced who we were. I could hear his breathing shake. "You turned our mistakes into something people needed. That's more than I ever did with my life." For a moment, I felt a lump in my throat. "Dad," I said quietly, "I didn't do any of this to destroy you. I did it to survive you." He exhaled, long and heavy. "I know, and I'm sorry it took the whole world to make me see it." There it was, the reckoning. Not loud, not angry, just real. After the call, I stood by my window, the night sky glowing above the city. Somewhere out there, my parents were living with the consequences of their choices, and I, for the first time, was living without theirs. The world now knew my name, but more importantly, I knew it. And I finally believed it was worth something. My art had started as an act of rebellion. Now it was an act of grace. And the sound of the world applauding me was nothing compared to the quiet peace inside my chest. Fame fades faster than paint dries. In the months after the reckoning, the noise around my story softened. The headlines disappeared, the cameras turned elsewhere, and the flood of interviews slowed to a trickle. But what remained was quieter and more personal. The chaos had given me visibility. The silence that followed gave me clarity. My paintings still sold. My name still carried weight in the art community. But late at night, when the world was asleep and the city lights flickered like restless stars, I'd sit in my studio and feel empty, not sad, not proud, just hollow. It was as if I had reached the top of a mountain I'd spent years climbing, only to realize the air up here was thin and lonely. I had won. My parents had fallen. Justice had been served. And yet, victory didn't feel like peace. One evening, I visited the Pine Street Gallery after hours. Elise was locking up, but she smiled when she saw me. "Can't stay away, can you?" she teased. "Guess not." I walked through the quiet hall, past my framed article and the still fading banners from the exhibition. The air smelled faintly of varnish and nostalgia. Elise joined me. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged. "Everyone knows my story. But I'm not sure anyone really knows me." She nodded slowly. "That's the curse of truth-tellers. The world applauds your bravery, but they don't stay long enough to understand the cost." Her words landed heavy, because she was right. When the world claps for your scars, they forget that you're still healing. After that night, I stopped painting for a while. My studio gathered dust. The canvases leaned against the wall like quiet witnesses, waiting for me to come back. I spent my days walking through Pike Place Market, along the docks, into coffee shops where no one recognized me. I watched people live ordinary lives, baristas laughing, couples arguing, kids drawing on napkins. There was something grounding about it. Life kept going, unbothered, unbroken, beautifully imperfect. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was simply existing. And in that stillness, the guilt I'd buried began to surface. One night, I opened my inbox and found an email from my mother. The subject line read, "We're moving." I hesitated before clicking. "Briar, we've decided to sell the house. There's too much attention here. Too many people who think they know us. Maybe that's our punishment. But I wanted you to know we're proud of you, even if it took us too long to say it. You don't have to respond. I just hope one day you'll forgive us. Love, Mom." I sat there for a long time, reading and rereading those words. Forgive us. The phrase should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. Because forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It wasn't something they could ask for like a favor. It was something I had to find on my own. A few weeks later, I drove past my childhood home. The for sale sign was planted in the front yard, the windows dark. I parked across the street and watched as strangers walked through. Potential buyers laughing and pointing at the walls that once held my silence. Through the window, I saw my old bedroom, the one where I'd hidden sketchbooks under my bed. The walls were white now, repainted, sterile. No trace of who I used to be. But somehow that made me smile, because I wasn't trapped in that house anymore. That version of me, the scared, obedient daughter who painted in secret, didn't exist there. She lived here, in the city, breathing in paint fumes and freedom. That house wasn't my prison anymore. It was a relic, a shell. I whispered into the wind. Goodbye. When I returned home, I finally went back to my easel. The first stroke felt strange, hesitant. But then the rhythm returned. The brush glided over the canvas like it had been waiting for me all along. I didn't paint anger this time, or grief, or triumph. I painted peace. Soft, muted colors, lavender, ivory, faded gold. The shapes were abstract, fluid, weightless. When it was done, I stepped back and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't my greatest work, but it was my truest. I titled it Still Here. The following month, Elise hosted a small private showing for local artists. No press, no big banners, just art and quiet conversation. When people asked me about my painting, I said simply, "It's about surviving yourself." An older woman looked at me with kind eyes. "You've been through something, haven't you?" I smiled. Haven't we all? That was the first time I realized that pain wasn't unique to me. It was universal. Everyone carried something unseen. My story was just one echo among millions, and maybe that was enough. Later that night, I walked to the waterfront. The moon hung low, shimmering across the black water. I thought about everything that had happened. The laughter, the betrayal, the silence, the fame. And I finally said it out loud. I forgive you. Not because they asked for it, not because they earned it, but because I didn't want to carry it anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about letting them back in. It was about letting myself out. The moment I said it, the air felt lighter. The ache in my chest loosened. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The next morning, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, me at the gallery, standing in front of the last apology. On the back, written in careful cursive, were 4 words. "We finally understand now." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just placed the photo on my desk beside a jar of brushes and whispered, "Took you long enough." But deep down, I knew this was the closest thing to peace we would ever have. As the sun set that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. My apartment glowed golden with the fading light. My art had begun as rebellion. It became therapy, and now it was my way of breathing. For years, I thought revenge was justice, but standing there, surrounded by color and quiet, I realized revenge was just the path. The destination was freedom. I had painted my pain into something that healed me, and maybe, somewhere out there, it healed them too. And that was enough. I used to think revenge was the destination. That one day, I'd stand over the wreckage of my past and feel victorious, untouchable, complete. But now, sitting in my studio with paint drying under the soft hum of the city, I finally understand something. Revenge isn't the victory. Healing is. The world knows my story. The girl who was told her art was worthless, who turned her wounds into canvases the world now pays thousands to see. But what they don't know is the quiet truth behind it all. That every stroke of my brush began with pain, and that every color was a step toward forgiveness. It's been nearly a year since that first exhibition, the one that started everything. Since then, life has changed in ways I never imagined. My art is featured in galleries from Seattle to London. I teach workshops to young women who once hid their sketchbooks the way I did. And yet, success doesn't feel like a roar. It feels like a whisper, a calm knowing that I made it, not because I was lucky, but because I refused to disappear. Every time I meet a student who says, "My parents don't believe in me," I smile softly and say, "Then believe in yourself twice as hard." Because I learned that sometimes the world won't clap until you've already finished the song. A few months ago, I got invited to speak at a creative conference, a place filled with hundreds of artists, dreamers, and skeptics. I almost said no. Public speaking still made my stomach twist. But something inside me said go. When I stepped onto that stage, the lights were bright and the air thick with quiet anticipation. Faces stared up at me, waiting for the woman whose story had gone viral. I took a deep breath. "I am Briar James," I began, and I was told my art would never matter. The room went still, and for a long time I believed that. Because when the people who raised you tell you you're not enough, it echoes louder than applause ever could. I saw heads nodding, eyes softening. But one day, I continued, I realized something powerful. Silence is not agreement. It's the sound of someone gathering strength. There was a pause. Then a quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. I smiled. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, remember this. You don't need permission to shine. The world doesn't hand you worth, you create it. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better, genuine. People stood, some wiping tears. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was connecting. After the talk, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, clutching a small sketchbook. "Your story saved me," he said. "I was going to quit last year. My parents said art was useless too. Then I read about you. And I thought, maybe it's not about proving them wrong. Maybe it's about proving myself right." His words broke me in the best way. I hugged him and whispered, "Exactly." In that moment, I knew the cycle had ended. The pain that once chained me had become someone else's key. Later that week, I went back to my parents' old house one last time. It had sold months ago, but I wanted closure. The new owners had remodeled. Fresh paint, trimmed garden, new life blooming where old wounds used to live. I stood at the edge of the driveway, where my father once told me, "Dreams don't pay bills." And I whispered, "They do now." It wasn't arrogance. It was peace, because the girl who once begged for approval no longer needed it. That night, I returned home and painted again. No pain this time, no symbolism, just color. Soft shades of dawn pink, seafoam green, and the faint gold of morning light. When it was finished, I titled it, "The Quiet Victory." It wasn't for sale. It wasn't for fame. It was just for me. Because some victories aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be felt. A week later, I received an unexpected envelope in the mail. No address, just my name written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a single folded note and a small photo. The note read, "We saw your latest exhibition online." Your mother cried. "We both did. You were right. We never understood what art really was. It wasn't the paintings. It was the heart we ignored. Thank you for painting what we couldn't say. Love, Dad." I stared at the paper for a long time. The photo was of me as a child, sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. My mother's feet were in the frame, half turned away. I smiled through tears. They would never be the parents I once needed, but maybe they were trying to become better people now, even if it was too late to share the same road. And that, I realized, was enough. A few nights later, I hung the quiet victory in my living room. It glowed softly under the evening light. As I sat there, wine in hand, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The humiliation, the silence, the rebellion, the triumph. All of it had carved me into someone I finally recognized, someone whole. And so, if you're listening to my story, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too unrealistic, too you, I want you to remember this. The world doesn't get to define your worth. The people who reject your light are often the ones too afraid to face their own shadows. Don't fight to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right, because one day, they'll see your name, maybe on a painting, a book, a song, a business, or even just in the smile of a life well lived. And they'll realize you were never the failure. They were just too blind to see your brilliance. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's thriving so loudly that their memory becomes a footnote in your success. Now tell me, what's the dream they told you was impossible? And when are you going to prove them wrong?